all of this is really about getting back to like our soul's own path, right? And like, what are the things that we do in our lives, whether through medicine or through mindfulness practices or whatever, through festivals, whatever it is, relationships that kind of kindle the soul and like allow the soul to sort of be the leader in how we're moving through the world.
Welcome to the Set and Setting podcast with Madison Margolin. As a journalist, Madison has spent years exploring the intersection of psychedelics, cannabis, and culture. This podcast brings together thought leaders from today's psychedelic renaissance to talk about the role of psychedelics in our inner and outer lives. You can support this podcast and find additional resources at BeHereNowNetwork.com/Madison.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Set and Setting podcast. I'm very excited to have David Bronner with us today. He is the Cosmic Engagement Officer, or CEO, of Dr. Bronner's, the family-owned, top-selling natural brand of soap in North America. The company caps executive salaries at 5 times the lowest-paid fully vested position and donates all profits not needed for business development to causes and charities they believe in. When I found that out originally about Dr. Bronner's, I was super inspired by that. So David, thank you. David graduated with a degree in biology from Harvard in '95, and by the end of that year, had his heart and mind blown wide open by psychedelic medicine while living in Amsterdam. Ever since, he's been dedicated to the responsible integration of cannabis and entheogens into American and global culture. He joined the board of MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, in 2015. And in 2019, he launched the nonprofit cannabis flower brand Brother David's to support Sun and Earth certification of cannabis grown under the sun, in the soil, without chemicals, and with fair labor. He also serves on the board of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which promotes regenerative organic agriculture and ethical dietary choice to support a more humane, sustainable, and fair farming system worldwide. So, David, thank you so much for joining me. It's really been a pleasure to get to know you over the years and appreciate all that you do for the psychedelic movement.
Yeah, right on. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah.
So I grew up on Dr. Bronner's, and I'm sure a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast did as well. And I would imagine you did too. So did you always think, like, as a kid, that you were going to end up joining the family business, or what kind of got you to really take this path of, taking Dr. Bronner's in this direction? And again, we talked about sort of the ethical components of the company, and it's just find it very inspiring.
Yeah. So, growing up, I guess it's a bit complex. So my granddad, really beautiful, and I guess just giving his story briefly. So he, his grandfather began manufacturing soap in the basement of their house in the Jewish quarter of Laupheim, a small German town in southern Germany, in 1858. And by the time my grandfather was born, his dad and 2 uncles had expanded the family operation quite a bit and had a much bigger factory in Heilbronn, another city in southern Germany. And actually our name was Heilbronner. Napoleon made all the Jews change their names or something at some point. So we must have been original in Heilbronn, then moved to Laupheim and moved back. Anyways, so my granddad came up in the guild system of the time and earned a master's of soap making through that. But he was also pretty activist. He was pretty Zionist, and he was clashing with his dad and uncles a lot. He really didn't want him mixing politics and soap, and so he came over to the States in 1929 at the age of 21, not so much because of Hitler or Nazis or fascism. That wasn't apparent yet what that was going to turn into, more just to forge his own path in life. And he was a consultant to the U.S. soap industry and helped design factories and launch products, and had met my grandmother, Paula, had 3 kids in the 30s, and in this time with the rise of Hitler, got increasingly desperate to get his family out. And his 2 sisters, Lottie got out at 36, at the age of 16, and ended up in a kibbutz, the Negev kibbutz, and then Palestine. And Louisa got out in 38, came to the States and was a chemist, and then eventually a professor of literature at UMass Boston. But his parents, like a lot of bourgeois Jews, thought they were going to ride out the madness and stay till it's too late. The factory was Aryanized, I think, in 1940, and then they were deported in thereafter. And Bertolt died in Theresienstadt, and Francisco was killed in Auschwitz in 44. So my granddad's reaction to this was obviously very traumatic. And at the same time, his wife, my grandmother, died. Like she was in and out of the hospital. So he was just going through an immense amount of tragedy. But in his response, he was also accessing clearly like some pretty profound spiritual, mystical states and in all of it. And he saw that in a nuclear armed world, if we don't realize our transcendent unity across religious and ethnic divides, that we're going to all perish. If we don't realize we're all children of the same divine source, and all the faith traditions at their best are pointing at it when they're not, demonizing each other and making idols out of their beliefs. So he was called on this mission, and for him, that was what it was all about. In the soaps, he would go around lecturing on this peace plan and would sell the family soaps on the side, and realized, word had gotten out that the soaps were really great, about a great, concentrated, versatile. You can use them for anything. They're not going to harm the earth. So word had gotten out, and he realized people were coming to just grab the soap and not listen to what he had to say. So he started downloading his message on the bottles. So that all one philosophy, and it's basically all one love. It's trying to show the spiritual giants of all the different faith traditions are, more or less on the same wavelength, and really resonated with the 60s and the counterculture. But in all this, he basically bailed as a father. So my dad and uncle and aunt came up in a series of foster homes and orphanages, and my granddad would check in once in a while, and financially supported them, but was more or less absent. So my dad, he joined the Navy, spent 8 years in the Navy, became a chief petty officer, his highest enlisted rank, and came out and went to work for my granddad in LA. And my granddad would send my dad to make soap and rent out a reactor in a facility in LA on the weekends. But it was just a difficult relationship. So when my granddad moved down to North County, San Diego, where we're currently headquartered, my dad stayed up in LA and rose to become head of operations at this other chemical manufacturing facility, where he developed, among other things, firefighting foam for structure and forest fires, and then a version for Hollywood. Because when you put firefighting foam on a forest fire, there's a lot of good reasons for firefighting foam, but it looks like a blizzard hit the forest. And so he made a version for Hollywood. So me and my brother grew up blasting foam on like Alka-Seltzer commercial sets in Griffith Park and, movie sets and stuff. And really ecstatic, super fun when you blast foam on people. And it's like, it's kind of like a snow day. It just is kind of like psychedelics, dissolves boundaries and just like liberates people, and it's very joyous. And anyways, that was more the business I was coming up in. And my Dr. Bronner's was pretty remote. Like I didn't really see my granddad that much. And when I did, he was, for him, it was super important that the grandkids got the all one God faith download, and it was a lot. I didn't really know what he was talking about. He's like, we must unite spaceship Earth. We're all one or none. And fortunately he was blind. So when he said, okay, give me the 13th, which was like a really long one, I, was able to pick up the bottle and rattle it off, and he'd be, very good, very good. I didn't really understand them. It was kind of weird. And, my dad, had rejected all that. For him, he associated that all one trip as bailing on a father. And I came up, my mom's Christian, Protestant. And so I was raised Protestant, but my dad did make sure I said the Shema in Hebrew and English every morning, along with my Christian prayer. So, he was connected. It wasn't like, and he continued to make the soap for my granddad and ship it down, but it was just difficult. So working for my granddad was definitely remote. What was more immediate was working for my dad in this phone business. And graduating college, the one thing I knew is I didn't want to do either of those. I was like, I just want to do my own thing in life. And in college, I realized how awesome cannabis is relative to getting drunk at the bars every weekend. And it really shifted to, and that kind of, wakes you up like, well, wait a minute, how can this obviously way better thing that's not nearly as problematic as alcohol be illegal? And so it started a little bit to awaken, but not that much. And it wasn't until Amsterdam. So after college, went to Amsterdam, which is, of course, the center of cannabis culture, in 95 especially. And I actually had a Euro pass. Supposedly I was traveling to Europe. But I got to Amsterdam and it was just so awesome. And I was in a squat and really international, a lot of really cool activists and Americans facing a lot of jail time if they set foot back in the States. And that really woke me up. And there was, in fact, a couple guys who were facing 10 years of life, and they were part of a church in Arkansas called Our Church that had cannabis as a sacrament. They're very public about it. And they're making a First Amendment challenge in 1993 to the drug war on religious grounds. And of course, that didn't work out in 1993 in Arkansas. And so they were busted up, and it was this whole thing. But it was and then simultaneous with this, I was having huge psychedelic experiences, really just getting blown to smithereens, full ego death into the love and light at the heart of existence. There's the long stories that go with that, but realized instantly that this is the love, this is the transcendent love that my granddad's been talking about, and that all the faith traditions are pointing at this when they're not being ridiculous. But even from there, it wasn't a straight line back. I mean, what I thought I was going to do was grow plants, grow cannabis, be a cannabis entrepreneur of some kind in Amsterdam. And so did that for like a few months, but my then girlfriend she'd gotten pregnant. I got her pregnant. And she miscarried. And it was just time to go back and just be with her, because she was going to come out to Amsterdam after she finished school, Harvard up. So I moved back, and I was a mental health counselor in the Boston, like the Waltham, Watertown area, like right outside Cambridge. And it was just amazing work. And Reagan had gutted the mental health field so that half of staff time hours were like temps like me who had no relevant training. But it was like an amazing experience. And I worked primarily with paranoid schizophrenic populations and halfway houses. But in the course of that was just going really deep. I'd become vegan, like realizing the disaster of Western consumption on the planet through our agriculture and otherwise, and really started to think about and read about business as an engine for social change. I think I'd read Paul Hawken had a book called Natural Capitalism that had dropped right around there, and it made a big impact about, can you take business, which is generally a really regressive force in society, and like how do you leverage it and adopt a multi-stakeholder capitalistic model that takes account of your employees, the earth, just the impacts, not just about making profit. And so in the course of this, I was like, holy shit, somewhere in there was like, oh my God, my Dr. Bronner soaps is just an incredible model of all this. And what an opportunity in my family to rock it and take it forward. And my ex-wife, my about to be wife, had gotten pregnant again, and Maya was going to be born. It was right around then I told my dad that I was ready to come back in. And Maya was born on March 7th, and my granddad, Dr. Bronner, died on the same day, March 7th, 97. But in like a few months prior, I was able to let him know that I truly understood him, or maybe it was a year, I forget exactly when, but at some point earlier, I'd been able to really sit down with him and express my love and respect and appreciation, and tell him how much I loved and understood what he was all about, and that I was going to dedicate my life to his passion. So then my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer like a month later. And, fortunately I made that decision to come back in. It wasn't like I was forced to. And then had an incredible year with my dad doing both the phone business and the soap business. And And then he died June 12th of 98. Just had an incredible year with him, just learning the ropes of life and business, and it was very intense. So anyways, that's the long answer to that question.
Thank you. Yeah. So I just want to know everything that's written on the soap bottle, your grandfather wrote all of that? Like that's all his download, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, I think he riffs, like the first, let me see. He's got like Rabbi Hillel, he's like, first, if I'm not for me, who am I? Nobody. Second, if I'm only for me, what am I? Nothing. If not now, third, and if not now, one, so he's like kind of like downloading, different teachers from different traditions, but then kind of giving his spin.
Yeah. Is there a part of the soap bottle message that resonates the most with you?
Well, I could keep going on that one. That's like, so like once more and less constructive, selfish, I work hard, perfecting first me, absolutely nothing can help perfect me, exceptions none. Only hard. Yeah. I mean, that's a good one of like just taking, making sure to help the world, you got to make sure you're developing yourself and your own talents and capacities. And
so how do you reconcile? And I see this a lot in spiritual communities, and this wasn't really a question I planned on asking, but because you mentioned it, is that, you said your grandfather was kind of like, he had this whole like spiritual message, like all one or none. And meanwhile, like he wasn't really showing up, as a father to your dad in the ways that immediate family needed him. So like, I feel like I see this a lot in
people now walking the talk kind of thing.
Talking. Yeah, exactly. And like when it doesn't translate to like the people who it's most important to in their immediate life.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely true here. I think the part of the story I didn't relay was that he was actually interned in 1947 against his will in a mental health asylum. Someone had actually crucified themselves in the Chicago area. Well, obviously had help, and my granddad wasn't involved, for his peace plan. And somehow he got on the authorities' radar. Mm-hmm. And he was administered shock treatments. He tried to escape 3 times. On his 3rd time, he got out and went west. And I think on some level, maybe he was concerned that he would be taken again. And so maybe he thought that was the best move. I don't know, in whatever logic that might have had. But I mean, he's ultimately a very traumatized individual doing, but absolutely. I mean, that's the shadow side of our family story for sure. And my dad really compensated way the other way and just made sure like it was all about family and community and showing up for whoever's right in front of you. And we really try to honor both examples of that. My granddad's more cosmic vision, but then my dad, like, how do you translate that into what's practical? What can you actually do to leverage society forward or help your community or family, and then engage politically. And this is kind of, I guess, this is kind of coming from actually an interesting cat in Amsterdam after I was like really opened up and way open, but also confused. And I remember a cat in Amsterdam, he's kind of pretty big, and he said a lot of stuff I didn't want to hear at the time. Among them was, because he counseled me that, going to a monastery, because that's one of the things I thought I needed to do. He's like, yeah, you can do that, but kind of hard to reintegrate into the world once you go. And what the world needs is adults engaged on the world's problems. And like, I'm engaged in policy work here in Europe. And, and at the time I was like, wow, that just sounds so boring. And like, obviously you're not that spiritually enlightened or whatever, but, ultimately he was right on. And I guess kind of getting into psychedelics a little like that for me is like the practical tool, like the most practical tool we have in front of us to open people's hearts and minds in the way that my granddad's vision can manifest in the world. And it's not that psychedelic medicines in and of themselves are the answer. Obviously there's all kinds of counter examples of people taking medicine and not acting that awesome. But overall, I think on average, it can be very helpful. It was very helpful in my life and helpful for many people's lives to get them on path and grappling with the big problems we're facing.
So is your, you mentioned, this big trip that you had, or big psychedelic experience that you had in Amsterdam. And is that, do you want to kind of describe that a little bit? And the second question being, is that the reason why you're also so passionate about influencing, using psychedelics as the way that you're kind of engaging with tikkun olam, or, kind of contributing to the world, or world repair, I guess, to translate that?
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I'll say there was a prior trip that was, in hindsight, was also important, but I didn't understand it at the time, how important it was. But it was my first mushroom trip. It was like a junior in college. And I remember looking down at my arm and like wondering, like, whoa. And by this time, at like 13, I'd rejected my Christian faith. I was like, Jesus, God so loved the world. Like, why do you send Jesus to this one spot? What about the Chinese / all the other planets? And so, I was a basic atheist, but I was also getting impatient in college with kind of scientific reductionism on one side and postmodern relativism on the other. And like, it was just like, okay, there's more to the story going on. And so that's the context of my first mushroom trip. I remember looking down at my arm and thinking, what does it mean? Like at a quantum level, I'm not different from the world. It's just like one continuous energy. And then like looking out the window and seeing like just the trees and the buildings and thinking like, wow, like when I eat and I poop, like the world's just like pouring through me. I'm not even like the same blood and stuff like month to month. I'm like a river connected with the world that's like a much bigger living reality process that I'm part of. And I'm not like alive over here and the world's over there. It's just like one dynamic living process. And everything out there is going to die and then be born. And like, it's just like this like living, dying, rebirthing deal and river that I'm all part of. And, I had this first experience of like a unity consciousness, like in, So then, so in Amsterdam, the context was, so my then girlfriend she traveled through Asia for 9 months and just had all these incredible experiences in college. And then it was my turn, she came back and then I was going and we were together. She was going back to college to finish up. But I went really deep into my experience. I was pretty much like non-communication. And then when I was like, things had gone down and it was, it's kind of, we're in a crisis, but I'd already kind of been opened and I was like, hey, it's all right. I'm not even like upset. I just know it's like ultimately I'm probably, there's way more deeper stuff going on. And so I went to there was this gay trans club called the Matzo. It was kind of they would have these all night parties. Like it's like a club. It was also like the Freaker Central. It was like, like all the squat, like all the SWATs. That was where you went. It was all like, the super trance kind of era. And yeah, so my first, so I was on acid and E. So like, I guess, first of all, I was going through a whole lot of internalized like homophobic shit. And, like, it was like my first like real experience. And just kind of like working through like just these false constructs of like gender and sexuality, and just getting to a point of like, well, I'm not man or woman or gay or straight. I'm like incarnate soul here to get down, like just kind of exploding all these like categories of identity and like getting pretty deep in there. And then I was dealing with my relationship crisis, and I saw my girlfriend at that time. I saw her in Asia, and I saw her like her eros and her compassion and her just beauty and her light. And it was so awesome. It was just so glorious and beautiful, and saw that that I had been jealous, deeply jealous, and had cut her down in 1,000 little ways, and coming back into college and, cut her down into the box, and just saw like, dude, better you die than be in the way of her light. And and died and just fell away. And as I fell, I saw like this demonic horde assaulting her light too. But then the light exploded and just embraced me into the infinite love and light. And that's where I saw, like, understood, like, immediately, like, oh my gosh, like, my granddad's right. And this was all very, like, energetic too. I could literally feel my heart and the chakra, like, blowing open and blowing up into my third eye. And yeah, so then I'm in there and I'm like, holy moly, you know, this is amazing. But then I kind of come out and I'm like, okay, so God, wow, you know, amazing, incredible. But wait a minute, there's like people getting raped and murdered, like right now, like as we're dancing, like how does that like go together? And then I was microscoped to nothing, and part of the God self, the self of all, like all living and dying and rebirthing on the beyond. And it was like, you know, the answer is like, there is no God apart. Like, there's not a God over here and suffering over here. It's just all one thing. It's all God self. And it's all like on this unimaginable, huge deal. You know, God self can do what to God self, whatever, you know, it is what it is. And I am that I am kind of thing. But then I saw Jesus stepping in to the maelstrom. Like, kind of his back to me a little bit, but I could see his face, and it was like super calm and serene and just like not trying to explain it, not complaining about it, just stepping into it. And I was like, wow, I want to serve and get down like that. You know, I want to be on that vibration. That's the answer. It's what you do. And that's what we're here for. And then the final test, you know, so I coming through all that. And then I'd met this gay guy earlier and had this like nice connection, and he was super cool. And his story was, he was actually a prostitute. He'd been trafficked as a kid, and, you know, we're just hanging in some cannabis cafe, and, you know, just a cool dude and nice connection. And all of a sudden he's in my sphere, cross-dressed as Helena. Like, he's like all beautiful, and he's now as Helena, right? And I'm like, whoa. I'm like, okay, well, anyways, I just fucking went through 5 different death rebirths on the mega and got married to Chris on the mega plane, and don't really need to deal with this, you know. And then I'm like, boom, back in the hole. And that was like a whole dynamic here too, like having like this kind of dialogue with God self or soul self, and wrong answer, and you're back in the dark hole, you know. So then I'm like, oh, so I'm in a dark hole. And I'm like, dude, like, why would you refuse to meet love and joy? Anybody's coming to love and joy in their heart, like, you answer in kind, you know. And then heart blows open again. And, you know, so I was like the final like level. And it wasn't like, you know, go sleep with this person or whatever. It's just like, just meet love with love. And, you know, like, just that's, and, you know, and it took a while to integrate that. I was basically like, you know, spiritual emergency, borderline psychotic myself, even though I was a counselor. I was like having my own like shit, like really integrating. But, and I found like Jungian, you know, a lot of you know, I was reading Thomas Groff and Carl Jung, and not so much Carl Jung, but like Joseph Campbell and other neo-Jungian. And, you know, ultimately like understanding like my girlfriend in Asia, like that was my own soul, like my anima was, you know, and her light, and, you know, and people who can carry your soul energy and vision are obviously very important people. But ultimately it's your soul and it's yourself. And what I was doing to her, I was doing to my own soul. Like, it was like blocking my own arrows, my own flow, my own divine flow. Like, and it's kind of like the law, what you do to others, you do to yourself. And yeah. And so like just dying away, like stop doing that, stop persecuting that beautiful energy. And a lot of it was like just that toxic, insecure masculinity, and just like dying to it and embracing the feminine and the beauty of it, and in me and in everybody. And yeah. And then, yeah. So, I mean, that was just a huge, huge experience, and just kind of like really set me on path. Yeah.
So, switching gears a little bit, you know, that, you know, obviously I feel like what you're describing is so much of what I focus on in my work is like, yes, I write about psychedelics and science and policy and whatever, but all of this is really about getting back to like our soul's own path, right? And like, what are the things that we do in our lives, whether through medicine or through mindfulness practices or whatever, you know, through festivals, whatever it is, relationships that kind of kindle the soul and like allow the soul to sort of be the leader in what we're and how we're moving through the world. So what do you do now to sort of keep that soul essence alive for you and kind of that you were able to tune into it on a regular basis?
Yeah, well, all of the above, I would say. Yeah, definitely. Medicine, I would say first and foremost, is a huge part of the path. And I would say in the last 7 years, I've gotten a lot more intentional about it. Do a lot more ceremony in a more indigenous kind of ceremonial context. And then also, but I still go big at Burning Man, but that's also its own ceremonial container and it's more intention even there. And I love Burn. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go this year, but it's a really beautiful Burning Man regional in Florida. It's like really awesome. And yeah, medicine with friends, celebration, ceremony. And I'm in a psychedelic training program, the AWE program. That's really powerful.
The AWE program?
AWE, it's psychedelicmedicine.net. Izzy's cousin Leela is the kind of head of it, and very, very awesome blend of transpersonal Western and indigenous immersion. And
to train people how to hold space, or? Yeah,
it's mostly people who already hold space and, but it's able to like really deepen them and actually connect them in a real lineage just, it's not, how do you say it? Leela himself says, I don't call myself a shaman. Like anyone who calls himself that's ridiculous, not about, but it's just about deepening your own like practice and connection. And like last spring, we were in Ecuador drinking yahe with the Ai Kofan people, which was really beautiful and powerful. And so that's been just incredible. I got married to Mia, my wife, in last June. We've got an incredible spiritual marriage and relationship, and we're very much on the path together, the medicine path. I met her at the Burn in 2013. She was building Zendo, and like our camp at the Burn, we host the Zendo staff, and I'm more there as my kind of board member of MAPS role, not as Dr. Bronner's at all, which is not allowed. So then meditation, I kind of got off my practice for the past year, but as of last week, I'm back on it. Kind of coming through a big death rebirth experience, actually. Just went to do a Hamblesia, which is a vision quest, Lakota style, 4 days, no food, no water. That's fucking huge and amazing. These indigenous, wow. And then and that's getting me ready for Sundance. So my first of a 4-year commitment. So I'll be sundancing, which is really, really big prayer. And that'll be first week of May.
What is that exactly? I mean, when you say Sundance, I think of the festival, but I feel like you're talking about something else.
Yeah. So in the Lakota ceremonial traditions, Sundance is, you basically for 4 days, you're dancing all day. You get breaks, like 40 minutes dancing, 20 minutes not, but you're basically doing that all day. No food, no water. At night, in the mornings and at night, you go through the inipi, through the sweat. And it's all about prayer and laying down prayer. And there's a central tree. That's the focal point of the prayer. And generally on your 3rd or 4th year, so you're getting into quite a, just state, just do the no food, no water. Although you can drink water, I think at night, hopefully, we'll see. I mean, I didn't drink any during the Vision Quest, and I wasn't dancing. I was like, oh, wow, it's not easy. But regardless, I'll rock it. You're basically laying down your prayer. You're focusing, and on your third or fourth year, generally, you're considered ready to make your flesh offering, and then you'll hook into the tree, and some will be suspended, some will just lean, and you're basically in your prayer and eventually ripping free to make your offering. So that's the Sundance, and it's a big commitment, and something I was invited to 5 years ago and was nowhere near ready, but the invitation came again, or suggestion came again at a time in life where I feel like, okay, actually, and I'm doing a lot of work with the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund. I'm actually on the board, although don't make a big deal about it, and help fundraise to help them support Indigenous conservation projects around the major medicines, and have experienced deeply in my life the power of these traditions to really connect us to spirit and our deeper selves and the nature, and that these cultures that we almost eradicated hold the healing for the world and for our disconnection and alienation from nature and each other. And
so yeah. I have a question. Is you talk about kind of prayer in the Sundance, or I guess in general prayer as part of the psychedelic experience, and I do a lot of research writing, whatever, around Judaism and psychedelics specifically, but I feel like sometimes people in the mainstream secular culture have an aversion to the word prayer, because it sounds not aversion, but it's sometimes people just don't always, or they're not always referring to the same thing when they use this word. And it sounds very hyper religious, right? When I first heard of prayer, I thought of you have to be in a synagogue and with a prayer book, and there's a specific way to do it. And I learned through my psychedelic experiences that it can be much more free form or much more personal and whatever. So I'm curious, what is prayer to you? And especially coming from both Jewish and Christian background and having exposure that way, and then seeing prayer in more Indigenous contexts, how do you, just reconcile all of that in your own relationship to it?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I would say prayer is not reciting other people, wrote traditional stuff. That's not generally, I guess unless you're really in there and really feeling it, great. But if you're not, then it's not really a prayer. I think prayer is a really heartfelt cry and intention for something beautiful and awesome for yourself, for others, for the world, that is sincere, and you're just in dialogue with the deeper soul self or spirit or higher power, whatever you want to call it. And I would say, so my prayer in Humblesia was, it was a lot about my relationship and Mia and just evolving to the next level that we're in process of, and I'm in a big kind of death rebirth process, kind of starting with that and into the Sundance. And my 50th birthday is actually May 7th. So it's just this big process I'm in. But at a certain point, on the culminating night, which was March 6th into March 7th, and March 7th, my granddad's death day and Maya's birthday. So you're in your altar, and you've got the prayer tobacco bags and to the four directions. And so I was facing east, and that's also the ancestral direction. And I was just really feeling my granddad. And on that fourth night, it was actually third night. We didn't actually go up the first night. So even though we were fasting, we didn't go up till the next day. So it was third night. But it was a culminating night. And I was seeing and feeling him, and feeling combing his hair and letting him know I was dedicating my life to his passion. And then I saw all of us up on the mountain. There's maybe 10 of us in separate spots. I saw all our prayers kind of in multi-prismatic color, like streaming down the mountain and into the tree. And then the tree lighting up and rocketing the energy around the atmosphere in the world, and seeing drops of mana dropping into kids' glasses, starving kids' glasses around the world. And like, as they drank, like getting really just instantly nourished spiritually, physically. I saw food like appearing in the cupboard. And I saw dry fields like springing to life, and then saw like strung out addicts on the street, just lost and alone, like their dead grandmothers, like coming in and giving them the deepest, warmest hug from the inside, just warming them up. That so at least like in that time they knew they were loved and experienced that. And it's interesting because I mean, that is in some version my granddad's prayer, but it's also the prayer we lay down at dinner often, which is it's like real simple. It's like, thank you, Goddess, for this food. May all be fed, may all be healed, may all be loved. And it was like this like really like beautiful intensification of, in a way, like a prayer like we say all the time. It's nice to say, but it was like just really, you get, you know, there's I guess levels of your prayer and levels of intensity. And so, you know, understanding like, wow, these Lakota traditions can take, that prayer and just intensify it. And it's not like that's going to magically feed the world, obviously not, you know, but it's about like just that intention and that prayer and helping orientate yourself. And then like, okay, well, how can I help fulfill that prayer? And
So another thing that I've noticed, and you talked about like sun dance, and actually like dancing is sort of like, you know, I find that dancing is like using your body as a prayer, you know, like using your body to communicate with God.
Yeah.
And like, I use it as this little bit of a metaphor. I have this whole kind of little Torah that I made up around dance, which is, I was in India once, and made friends with a guy in Goa who said, you want to get in touch with your intuition, just dance. And I said, what is that? Like, why? What does dance have to do with intuition? And I thought of it as, you know, if your soul is like a flame, and each flame has its flicker, and if you can sort of tune into like the unique flicker dance of your soul, then like that's like a microcosm of like the embodiment of your soul. And then how do we like then move through the world, like dance through the world in alignment with that, with the, you know, the way our soul is meant to move. And so, you know, I also see so much of the psychedelic work that you do and activism work and regenerative agriculture work as kind of like the active application of prayer, right? Like, is it, you know, and this is the thing I've also been, I don't know if critical is the word, but I've also wondered about in the Ram Dass community. And I grew up with Ram Dass. He's a good friend of my dad, or was a good friend of my dad. Is like, is it enough to just be here now? Or it's like, once we're here now, like, aren't we also like tuning into everything that needs fixing, right? Like, can being here now be the prayer for what actually needs amelioration in the world? And so this is like kind of this spiritual path that gets me activated. And so again, I see that you're so activated in activism, so to speak. So how does that kind of all come together with you? Like, how is the activist work that you do an expression of your spiritual path?
Yeah. Well, first, like dance, I mean, that's a huge part for me too, like on psychedelics, to be able to dance. And actually, that's where the suggestion came from to me to get into Sundance, was on the Yahe. I was just like moving energies and just like, you know, just like for me, it's just a real way of just kind of moving through stuff in vision state, and this can really help. You know, meditation. So I'm finally getting back on my meditation as well. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, being here now is great, but I mean, the world needs us to engage on the world's problems. And I mean, there's a time, and I was getting myself out of balance, like getting too caught up in advocacy and business and family and all my roles and responsibilities. And you can go too far, and you do need to be here now. And that definitely has been a big message coming through. Like, you need to create that space more in my life, and space for me and Mia, and really to get into those deep, intimate. And I would say that's another the most important really is like me and Mia's like that, like the love we have and the intimacy, and like the real special spaces we can push into, and making sure I'm prioritizing that. first and foremost, and not letting the relentlessness of life like get in the way of that. So but once that's all balanced, we're all like out of balance one way or the other, like generally when you check in, it's like, okay, what way you need to go. But yeah, some people are unbalanced, like, okay, they're just having these spiritual experiences and being here now way too much, like, you need to like,
what do you do with it? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And it's like the Bhagavad Gita, like it's all about duty and like, what is it? Arjuna doesn't want to get in there, right? He's got the battlefield laid. He's got family and friends on the other side. And, it's like, I don't want to get in there. I mean, this is gnarly. And like, and it's basically, that's where the teaching gets laid down. It's like, no, you gotta get in there. You gotta do what your karma duty calls and meditate and do all that stuff. But, yeah. So, I think like for me, that's just a natural extension and, and having these really profound experiences, first of all, like, how do we integrate these medicines that were so helpful for me and for you and for so many? And like, how do we do this in the right way and promote, intentional good outcomes? And then, but then that consciousness, like, you're like, you're saying like, yeah, wait a minute, how can we in fucking 2023 and have this homelessness problem? This is ridiculous, and what can we do to change social policy so that, at a minimum, you've got, food, clothes, shelter, in our society and around the world. And, there's just like, that, how to say, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of need. I mean, it's great we're having all these spiritual experiences, but if you're starving, like, we got to take care of that first and foremost. And so, yeah. And actually, that's one of the, like, once we end the drug war and integrate our allies, like, I want to turn to the homelessness. I mean, hopefully fucking that's going to get solved here. But yeah, I think it's really important to, have a component of activism that's not beyond your own immediate family community, and it's kind of considering the world at large. And it's not like you can take on all the world's problems. And so you got to like kind of focus and like, where are you called? And, psychedelic policy reform, drug policy is my dominant. But, we've also engaged on minimum wage and income inequality to an extent. But other people, that's their whole life. And then animal welfare, and, there's many causes, abortion access, whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that needs to be getting after. I think if all of us wake up and get after whatever we're called to, then we'll solve it.
I feel like with psychedelic activist work, psychedelics aren't just for themselves, so to speak. Like, once people are tuning into psychedelic consciousness and healing, it's a way to actually, they're tuning into like other systems, right? Like, once we start thinking psychedelically about the environment or about homelessness or about food security or food insecurity or stuff like that, like, what I personally think is the promise of psychedelics is that, this feeling of oneness, quote unquote, that's so central to, the quote mystical experience, which can be occasioned through psychedelics, is this like foundation of empathy that would motivate us to then take action in, whatever cause most resonates with the person. And so, you said no one can fix all the problems in the world, and I'm not saying psychedelics can, but I do think that the particular constellation of activist work that you do with Bronner's, with Dr. Bronner's promoting or donating to so many causes is actually really touching on such an interesting web of disparate causes that come together at a central core. And you're really at the middle of that. So number one, thank you. And number two, like, where do you hope it all goes? Like, where do you see the psychedelic movement at right now? And what are both like, what's the promise of it that you hope for? And also what are some issues that we now have to deal with, seeing that it's maturing and coming upon its own, crises in different sectors of the industry?
No, totally. Well, I guess, first of all, I'll just note, like, another big passion focus for us is regenerative organic agriculture. it's basically how do we farm and grow the food and fiber for our clothes and stuff for our soaps, and how do we produce all this in a way that isn't destroying the world? And if you look at like a wild ecosystem, like a forest, it's totally self-regenerating. You don't have a bunch of synthetic pesticide and fertility inputs. It's a self-regenerating system. So how do we model that in our farming ecosystems? And so that's a big passion. And we've got all our major supply chains right now. We're working with different farming communities who receive prices that enable them to take care of their land and their people in a good way in their communities. And so that's a big focus. So this vision of a world that's at peace, peace, love, understanding, respect across cultures and peoples, and everyone's got their basic needs met and living in harmonious, sustainable vibration with nature and connected. And how do we get there? Well, psychedelics experience, as you say, can really help us have these experiences of connection and unity with each other, with the natural world. But just like those experiences are speaking to a very deep truth already and in our future, but we're not there. I mean, it's just like, it's not like, oh, well, it's already all one. It's like, yes and no. I mean, it is all one, and it obviously is not all one in the world. It fucking sucks big balls for a lot of motherfucking people. And like, how do we make it all one? How do you reflect that love that you've experienced? Like, how do we make that manifest in the world? It's like we're getting a taste of what can be. And so you gotta like get after it. It's not like you're like, oh, I had that experience. And, it's like, no, how do you honor that? How do you integrate that? That's what matters. It's like the experience itself only really matters how you honor it, or how you are in relationship to it. I think that there's, for the movement, I think it's important to integrate. I guess there's different ways of integrating the medicines, and there's I would say two tensions or two wings in a movement. One that is more about regulated access, therapeutic kind of container where people can come in and take MDMA or psilocybin or whatever medicine with a trained facilitator who helps orientate and set up and set the setting or helps the person with that, and then holds the space and then helps with the integration. And I think that obviously very much depends on who is the facilitator and where the person is at taking the medicine are the most crucial variables. But generally speaking, it's like really good because then you're doing with a blindfold, which is like, it's a whole other dimension. So like once you put on a blindfold, I mean, you're 90% there. Like that's going to be great. You're like not in this distracted, whatever kind of thing. You're like really going inward and going to work on your stuff, which is, I think, really important. So I think just having that coming into the culture of like, psychedelics aren't just about going to festivals and dead shows and whatever, or being in nature, it's all about that. But it's also about putting on the blindfold and going in and working on your stuff on the real deal. So I think that's really important way. But that should not get in the way of being in nature or at home or, or sitting for each other or, doing whatever. So decriminalization of psychedelics is also very important. So outside of any regulatory, having the freedom to grow your own medicine, sit for each other, do whatever you want with them. That's also very important. And then also that allows for self-regulating communities to flourish so that the regulated access is great, but it comes with a cost. And there's ways of making it more equitable and accessible. But, at the end of the day, I mean, and group models are going to be really crucial to that. And, but at the end of the day, it costs. There's like a real money barrier that there's different sliding scale models that are coming online, group models, ways to mitigate that. But ultimately, decriminalizing the medicine is important for accessibility reasons as well. And then also that once, let's just say you're working some deep traumatic stuff out, it really does make sense for you to go and do this, especially for your first experience, to like go do this kind of one-on-one work and pay that cost and do this work and do all that stuff. But like once you've done it, then, maybe it makes more sense to join a self-regulating community healing circle or a church that, it's going to be much more economically accessible. You've got the mutual camaraderie and support. And this is like more for the long haul. So I think like both of those models are really important. I think in Colorado, and obviously things got a little intense, but overall, I think the policy is correct that you've got regulated access combined with decriminalization that allows for these self-regulating communities and churches to flourish. In Santo Daime in the UDV are examples of now legal ayahuasca churches. I think we're on the cusp of seeing a lot more. And basically, there's a lot of churches now kind of operating in a gray area, but, are pretty safe, I would say. That most of the DEA is doing is seizing medicine at the border, which is plenty bad, but no one's going to jail at this point that I'm aware of. And I think, in the next few years, hopefully we'll start to see that more and more religions getting formal recognition and that whole process becoming easier, which is great because that transcends all states. Like it's not just, progressive states that have ballot measures. We can actually start having legal access across all 50 states. And then what I'm interested in the regulated access side in this 24 cycle is to bring sassafras. So like, kind of bringing it in with the natural medicine, which politically is like, culture's not yet ready for LSD and, so trying to bring synthetics per se into trying to do anything with that is just not really politically possible yet. But we feel like we could decriminalize sassafras and then on the regulated access side, have MDMA made from in-state, like greenhouse grown, there's some grasses in South America that have really high sassafras, not just the trees in Indonesia, but a much more sustainable source. And you could grow that hypothetically, like in a greenhouse in Oregon. Mm-hmm. And then have, like, one of the thoughts I've had is to like circle back on Oregon and decriminalize all the medicines like we did in Colorado, make them all eligible for regulated program as well, but then bring in sassafras. And have MDMA then, because MAPS were about a year away from FDA approval, and that's obviously awesome. And we've done all kinds of good work, busting the culture open, with this whole FDA approval process. But that's just a tactic, and MDMA for PTSD obviously is great, but we want MDMA available for couples counseling, personal growth, like all of it.
Right.
And that's these state regulated programs. That's where it's at, and you can do the, just really incredible work. So it's like dreaming, how do we bring MDMA into that, knowing like, okay, we got to do it in this natural context for political reasons. So, so we're thinking, okay, decriminalize sassafras and then on the regulated do MDMA. So anyways, creative thinking like that. And then alongside that is also ending the drug war completely, like we did in Oregon, Measure 110. And move to a treatment, not jail model for people struggling with substance use. Unfortunately, it's a little like, the implementations has been complex and difficult, and there's a lot of blowback. So I don't know if the political winds into 24 cycle will be such that we can do that again, or if we're gonna have to wait until another cycle. But that's some of the big reform. Yeah.
What, and I remember I did this story with you several years ago at this point for Playboy, like kind of how you're, occupying this center position among so many different groups, and there's so many politics within the psychedelic space. And so my question here is like, how can we, like zooming out, bird's eye view, like use psychedelic consciousness as a way to transcend the politics that end up often being very divisive and blocking progress?
Yeah. Well, I know personally speaking, it's incredibly helpful. And I mean, cannabis is like my number one go-to ally. And I don't smoke like that much, but I smoke every day. Mm-hmm. And I remember in my prior relationship, like thinking, like I'd be in an argument and I'd be like, man, I don't, I'd be outside with my bowl and it's like, dude, go smoke a bowl, and I'd be like, dude, I'm right. I don't want to be wrong. I'm right. But as soon as I smoke the bowl, I'll be like, like 10 minutes later, it's like, dude, go apologize. You're way off, and just like that, how it can disinvest you from your kind of mood and your whatever self-preoccupation and kind of give you that more, whatever, disinterested, empathic view of the situation. So yeah, I mean, definitely the medicines have that ability for us if we're open to it. But obviously there's a fair amount of whatever division in the movement and paranoia, and medicines can feed ego inflation and narcissism and paranoia and all that kind of stuff. But it's not like the paranoia is not completely unfounded. I mean, we see what happened to cannabis and the corporate takeover there, and we're seeing it in pharma, the corporate takeover, and so yeah, trying to do the psychedelic policy as much as possible on the regulated. I mean, that the criminalization, that's also what's really important. Is like, no matter what the hell happens on the regulated access side, no matter, how far off the rails it might go, like if you decriminalize the medicines, and at least, we've got the self-regulating communities and freedom to, no matter how bad that might end up. But we've done, like, I think a pretty good job of like, controlling, like no single entity can own more than 5 clinics, and controlling the size of the grow spaces. So like, it's more like many people making livelihoods versus like one corporation dominating. And yeah, I forgot exactly what question I'm answering, but
just like, we're at a point now where there's been a lot of, and this might be, I don't want to get too inside baseball for the audience, what all the politics are of the psychedelic movement. But like in a nutshell, like what would you say, now that we're, 7 years out of legalizing cannabis in California, seeing, I think it's 7, it's from 2016, and I hope I'm doing the math correctly. But pretty much like what is like the biggest challenge you think that might be facing the psychedelic space, and using psychedelic ethos and consciousness, how can we overcome that challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is like, insofar, psychedelics have like this super liberatory potential within them, but they're also at risk of and in the process of being co-opted by the dominant capitalistic forces, and just kind of getting pigeonholed into these more whatever kind of frames. And I mean, even like the whole therapeutic thing is like, I mean, it's great. But I mean, the idea that you're going to go in and take mushrooms once and you're cured of depression, I mean, it's like, yeah, it can be really helpful, but it's about a relationship. It's about like being on a path that with medicine and meditation and fitness and diet and all that stuff. And there's, and not that, and with PTSD, maybe it's more, can really be that one and done kind of thing. And it's not one and done. I mean, you're in a pretty intensive therapeutic process over, I think, 3 months, and there's only 6 sessions with no medicine, 3 sessions with medicine. And I think when you're like dealing with like an acute traumatic thing that you really can't unlock and kind of free yourself. But even then, okay, you might be freed of that acute one, but we're all struggling with dilemmas of life, and we can all use the help of these medicines. And so I think having that more ongoing relationship with medicine and deepening your own self-awareness and maturity and growth on the path, it's just key for all of us, and can help us all just be better versions of ourselves and be in better relationship with each other. And I mean, it'd be like great if we get to like an indigenous community in the Amazon where the whole community is drinking ayahuasca, and they're all like kind of healing and entering our vibration. And I'm sure that's incredibly helpful for resolving whatever conflicts that might be going down, or just helping get some more perspective and insight. Not always. I mean, there's definitely dark sides of all that too. I mean, sorcery, and there's but I mean, at the high potential, it can and is used like that. And it'd be great if someday Congress every 3 months like has a drink ayahuasca, and not necessarily all together, but maybe in whatever community take whatever medicine, approved list of medicine.
Cool.
But
right. Everyone has the dose the water supply, all those types of.
Yeah, that kind of vision, but obviously that's a bad idea in that you want to have set and setting and people being ready to, not freak out. So, but yeah, some more intentional version of that fantasy.
Cool. So is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you want to touch on, talk about, go over? It's like free form.
Yeah.
Journalist's last question, pretty much.
Yeah. No, I think we kind of touched on everything.
Yeah. And how can people find out about what you're up to? Like, where should they follow along? Any initiatives that you're supporting, stuff like that.
Yeah. So Dr. Bronner's drbronner.com. If you click the blog, I'm one of the authors. There's like many authors up there, but I think hopefully some way to see my blogs in some easy way rather than just scrolling the whole list. But I occasionally, I think every few months we'll post something. My last one was actually our journey to Auschwitz. We visited Auschwitz and then our ancestral homes in Germany, and really deep, powerful experience, and blogged about that. I've got a few in the hopper that I haven't started work, but one I want to blog on Israel and just how off the rails is going over there, and just we need to call it. It's just apartheid on Palestinian land, and we need to do what we can to help. I want to do one called Figure It Out If You Possibly Cannabis, and it's about integrating cannabis in your life and how helpful that can be.
Wow. Cool. Yeah. That's so cute. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's really a pleasure to get to talk to you, and just so much respect and appreciation for all that you do and that Dr. Bronner's in general stands for and has done for the world. So thank you.
Yeah. Right on. Well, thanks so much for having me, and that was awesome.